Low level runs have always been the most interesting types of challenges in my opinion. A lot of other challenges are usually either something really mundane like a solo challenge, or some meme category like can you beat Persona Q2 without humans? Don't get me wrong, these challenge runs have their merit, but a common factor among a lot of them that I've noticed is that most obstacles can be overcome by one thing. If all else fails, just overlevel. Now, for a game with number-based stats that gradually increase over time, it only makes sense. But what if we did the opposite? What if we were always underleveled? Naturally, as you get better at a game, you're able to overcome obstacles and hard wall bosses with less grinding. But how far can you get with just the bare minimum? How much can your knowledge of the mechanics alone carry you? That's what we're gonna find out in this video. For this challenge, I'll be playing Persona 3 FES, and these are the rules I'm running. My goal is to beat the game while minimizing XP as much as humanly possible. You know, without losing my sanity. This run will be on hard mode, I have to get the true ending, I'm not allowed to use the infamous Nick skip glitch with Tanaka's social link, and I'm not allowed to play on New Game Plus. In order to dilute experience as much as possible, a full party must always be used whenever possible. Permanently increasing Persona stats via the arcade or card incenses is banned for as long as possible, at least until after the final Tartarus Keeper. And yes, the official strategy guide for FES calls the Tartarus Guardians Keepers, so I might use them interchangeably. All other mechanics are fair game. I will be allowing speed up and save states outside of battle just to save time. I'm also not really going to be talking about story events at all. I already made a huge video doing that, so if that's what you're looking for, just go watch that video. That being said, story-based bosses are still going to be pretty spoilery in nature, so don't watch this if you haven't played the game yet. I know this should go without saying, but what can I say, some people need the hint. The game starts off on a series of mandatory encounters with regular shadows. A scripted shuffle time with a pixie will occur no matter what, which means I will immediately acquire pixie and be able to fuse personas now. However, since the compendium isn't unlocked until after the first full moon, I'm not going to fuse anything just yet. I'd rather not get myself stuck in a corner with only one persona for a whole chapter of the game. After all those forced encounters, our challenge truly begins at level 3. I'll lay out how I go about avoiding normal encounters for basically the entire game. Because I'm playing on hard mode, escape rates are greatly lowered for me. The safest way to avoid battles is to always attack them from behind without them noticing you. You can escape battles on the first turn guaranteed with a player advantage. If I get caught in a bad spot, I can still technically escape, but it's not super likely. I'll eventually get the Trifuri skill for these types of situations. If I need to farm money or items, it's easy peasy. The floors regenerate every time you re-enter the dungeon. Early game money is pretty tight, but later on chest money becomes very generous. You could spend your entire wallet and replenish it in just a few chests. Because equipment at the shop unlocks based on the player's level, it's actually better to farm chests for equipment upgrades after a certain point. Next, I should probably explain how I'm going to go about social links. I'll be prioritizing social links based on which arcanas have the most useful personas for my purposes. For example, arcanas that have consistently good spellcasters will be at the highest priority. Arcanas that are strength-oriented will have a slightly lower priority, since magic is generally better. But there will be quite a few cases where physical attacks will still come in clutch, so I'll still need some. Healing personas would take on a mid priority, and most of everything else will range from mostly low to mid priority. Oh, and arcanas that consist of personas that will probably be too high level for me by the end of this run will be ignored completely. I'm not really going to be touching much outside of social links and social parameter activities until I've maxed out all the social links I care about. But before I even get started on social link stuff, I'm actually able to return to Tartarus after the tutorial. The first thing I do is buy armor. I won't be buying weapons in this playthrough because I can find plenty in Tartarus and will eventually have another way of getting weapons as well. Something unique about Persona 3's equipment is that the vast majority of weapons and armor have a random bonus effect attached to them. Games after Persona 3 would make them fixed. The effect is rolled after it's added to your inventory, so that means you can save your game, go to the police station the next day, buy something, and reset until you get the effect you want. For the sake of saving time, I just wrote a save state before making a purchase, and reloaded until I got the effects I wanted. The ones I'm after are the ones that grant a small amount of resistance to an element. It's not enough to trivialize the damage of said element, but it does get rid of any weakness flags for the wearer, meaning they won't get knocked down and give the enemy an extra turn. I get armor to cover Yukari's and Junpei's weaknesses to Elec and Wind, respectively. My protagonist won't need to worry about weaknesses for a little while, so I hold off on buying him anything for now. Upon returning to Tartarus, I decide to farm chests until I get a bow for the protagonist. You don't absolutely need this, it just makes the first keeper easier since it's weak to pierce. With Junpei's wind weakness covered and 2 bow users, this fight's a piece of cake. I leave Yukari on act freely and assign Junpei to attack just one of them at a time. I'm pretty sure this fight was designed with the minimum level in mind. Dancing Hands, on the other hand, I'm not taking any risks. These guys can use fire, ice, elec, and wind attacks. They can also inflict panic to cut you off from using skills. They're weak to strike, so I decided to just stun lock the Dancing Hands. In the PS2 versions of Persona 3, both enemies and allies that are knocked down use up their next turn getting back up, unless they're hit while down. So in some cases, it's actually better not to go for the all-out attack. I know for a fact that I'm not ready for Rampage Drive, especially with only an Orpheus and a Pixie. I could grind Pixie a couple levels to get Polinpa, which does work on this boss, but I want to avoid optional XP for as long as possible. There's not actually a deadline for reaching the roadblock in Tartarus, so I'll just put it off until the next full moon operation. Fast forward to the monorail. This is the only full moon with forced normal encounters. Something I make absolutely sure of is letting Pixie soak up some of the XP. Junpei isn't in your party for the first 2 encounters, so he ends up falling behind by a level. Priestess herself isn't all too bad. My Orpheus isn't really dealing good damage, so I switched to Pixie to have my Protag focus on support. Convenient since my Pixie just learned Racunda. I also put my Mazio gems to good use while the priestess summons her minions. Junpei and Yukari are able to finish off the minions just fine. One of the minions is programmed to heal the priestess, but that never happens thankfully. Priestess is able to inflict panic as well, but that never really becomes an issue. The priestess tries to summon one more minion, but I set my party members to assign target and finish the boss. All the battles from this full moon operation got me all the way from level 4 to level 8. 2 levels from the encounters and 2 more from the priestess alone. Pixie also grew to level 4 and learned Polinpa, which will help us defeat the Rampage Drive. Before tackling Tartarus again, I work on social links and stats until Akihiko finally joins the party. He has super resistance to electricity and is much higher level than the rest of the party. This, along with Polinpa, will basically trivialize Rampage Drive. First block enemy stands no chance against a level 12 Akihiko. I can finally move on to the next section, but before that, I finally have access to the compendium, so I can finally fuse freely. I fuse an Apsaris because that's the only thing I can get with my Pixie and Orpheus. However, I can now repurchase personas from the compendium and keep fusing different combinations for the rest of the game. Apsaris is all I'll need for the next keeper though. Crying Table is weak to ice, and while I'm still using the stun locking method, I make sure to survey the turn order so I can optimize my party commands. I can have the others attack enemies if their turns come after the enemy gets back up. This helps speed up the process and lets me pick off these enemy groups one at a time. I don't gain any levels from either of the past 2 battles, so that means I'm coming into Change Relic with my Protag and Yukari at level 8, Junpei at level 7, and Akihiko at level 12. I'm just gonna save you the trouble and tell you that it got nowhere. The only wind-resistant persona I have is Alp, but I'm still too squishy to withstand the boss's onslaught. Couldn't even get it down to half health. So once again, we're not finishing the Tartarus section until after the next full moon operation. On a lighter note, Block 2 is where gold hands start to spawn. As of right now, they will only drop coins which can be sold for money, but they'll also drop something else for us later that I intend to make use of. Most importantly though, they give 0 experience points. This means I can farm them as much as I want while keeping my level from increasing. In the meanwhile, I get ice-resistant armor for Akihiko and work on my normal day activities. I put most of my focus on trying to max out Magician because, as the name implies, personas of that arcana will usually be our best magic users. For the next full moon operation, Yukari will be absent from our party and will receive no experience. There's a short section where you have to navigate Tartarus alone, but using my usual ambush and run shenanigans, I avoid all the enemies just fine. Anyone who has played this game knows how this boss fight starts. Empress starts off weak to all physical, and Emperor starts off weak to all magic. I fused a Jack Frost who has both, so that's a free first round of damage. The two get some pretty good damage on my party though, so after knocking down the enemies, I switch priority to healing everyone. They use up their turns getting back up, meaning I can set my party to standby and continue stun locking. I know this sounds really busted right now, but I swear this strat won't be sustainable forever. I managed to beat the bosses before they even get to change their weaknesses, and with that, I jump from level 8 all the way to level 12. From this point forward, Fuka becomes our new navigator, and Mitsuru joins the party. Now that we have more than 3 party choices, I'm gonna have to make a choice as to who I'm going to replace. Experience is limited in this run, so I have to make sure it all goes to the ones I plan to use long term. I decided to bench Junpei. And you know what? Just to prove a point to all the naysayers, we'll put a little counter on screen for how many times Mitsuru casts Marin Karen. Be sure to pay close attention to it. And with that, my final party has been assembled. No, I'm not joking. Generally speaking, magic is better because of boost and amp passives, both of which can be gotten in accessory form at the jewelry shop. This will especially make a difference once the gap between our levels and the enemies gets bigger because magic boosting passives raise your damage by percentages. Physically oriented party members just aren't as strong, especially at really low levels, and there will most definitely be times where I need my protagonist to play a supportive role while other characters dish out damage. Ken could potentially make for a good replacement for Yukari, but I feel having a party member with Meipatra will make life a lot easier in the long run. Another thing that becomes available is weapon fusion. We can now farm gold hands for blank weapon bases. For now though, let's just focus on the next couple of boss fights. First, Change Relic. I fused Yomotsu Shikome just for auto Tarukaja more than anything. I also have Fornius for Rakunda. Akihiko won't be getting buffs for a few more levels. With a much higher level party alongside a level 18 Mitsuru, surviving the attacks becomes much more manageable. I have Akihiko and Yukari set on healing, and set Mitsuru to assign targets so she'll do nothing but attack. Because I went into Tartarus as soon as Mitsuru became available, she was in great condition. This increases her critical hit rate, and actually allows her to get 2 crits on the boss, knocking it down for 2 all-out attacks. The boss does get my entire party into critical health, so I use a magic mirror to stall for healing. Yukari's super resistance to wind comes in handy on the random chance it decides to single target Garula. The boss was close to death, so I just finished it with the Megiddo gem. The next boss is the Gold Beetles. This will be another stunlock boss. However, this one is one of those bosses that takes minuscule damage from their weaknesses, which means I'll have to slightly adapt my strategy. I have Yukari assigned to attack the one that gets its turn right after me, since it'll use up its turn getting up anyway. These guys are immune to ice, so I just have Mitsuru set to heal support, and Akihiko on knockdown. Since he gets his turn last, I can safely all-out attack them without any retaliation. I use one of my off turns to cast Tarukaja on Yukari. Once the first beetle goes down, I just set Yukari to standby. Akihiko and I finished the job with ease. Yukari grew to level 9 after those fights, but no one else gained any levels. I know for a fact that I can't handle Intrepid Knight for now, so I decided to do some prep for the next full moon. I farm gold hands for 2 full sets of weapon materials. The next bosses can inflict charm and fear, so my plan is to make 2 sets of weapons resisting each of those respectively. Personas of the Devil Arcana grant resist fear, and lovers will grant resist charm. I continue to work on social links and Elizabeth dates, during which I max out Magician. I also rank Hanged Man just enough to where Inugami can learn Medea immediately upon fusion. Inugami's Elect Resist will be nice for Hierophant, and Chimera for fire resistance against lovers. I also buy energy rings to boost everyone's max HP. This should make up for the level difference a little bit, at least in terms of tanking hits. Overall, I prepared pretty well for these fights, except I forgot to get armor to cover Mitsuru's fire weakness. Thankfully, this only ends up being a minor setback. Akihiko still doesn't have any debuffs yet, so I set him to assign target along with Mitsuru. Yukari is set to heal, and I have my protagonist on support duty. Hierophant never manages to hit me once with Prophecy of Ruin. Those weapon fusions were well worth it. My Inugami has Bufu and Ice Boost, so I try to inflict some damage whenever I'm not playing support. Overall, a really easy fight. I gained enough experience to jump from level 12 to 16. Yukari is quickly catching up in levels as she jumps all the way from level 9 to 14. Akihiko becomes level 17 and finally learns Tarunda, and Mitsuru is level 20. But we're not done just yet. We still have lovers to contend with. This time, I have my charm-resistant weapons on everyone. Yukari heals, while Mitsuru is on assigned target unless I need healing. I switch Akihiko between offense and support, depending on whether I need to recast Tarunda. Lovers is considerably more aggressive than Hierophant, and deals more damage to my party. I found Miragion a little more dangerous than Hierophant's Mazionga. The boss manages to charm Mitsuru once, but I heal it off almost immediately. I actually end up needing to use my 2 bead chains. Thankfully, I still managed to win on my first try, increasing my level to 18. The rest of the party levels up too, but the only significant one is Mitsuru growing to level 21, learning Bafula. There's a specific reason I waited until now to fight Intrepid Knight. It's because I know for a fact I can beat this boss with the help of a specific persona, Fortuna, who I appropriately fuse Inugami and Chimera to get. I also fuse Oberon for a later boss. At my current level, I'm able to buy Vitality Rings from the accessory shop now, so I promptly replace my energy rings with them. While this boss can be charmed, the odds of it are pretty low, and I know I can win without it. So I just have Mitsuru set to full assault, unless I need healing. The boss absorbs wind, so Yukari is solely focused on healing, unless Akihiko gets a lucky shock, in which case I hit the rush command for a free knockdown. Mind Charge Magarula is scary, but survivable with Tarunda, and the knight doesn't use it all the time. Yukari's super resistance is also once again very handy. It's still about the same as a typical Intrepid Knight fight, not too bad. The next keepers are Furious Gigases, I think that's the correct plural form. It's essentially another Gold Beetle fight, but they're soft weak to wind instead. Mitsuru picks them off one by one with her Bafula, while Akihiko and Protag debuff. Mitsuru's damage is boosted significantly with her Ice Bracers. The last remaining Gigas does almost get a Power Charge Gigantic Fist off, but thankfully Mitsuru dodges it. I attempted the next keeper, Fanatic Tower, several times to no avail, so I leave and prepare more for the time being. In terms of social links, I'm mostly focused on Hermit since it's summer vacation, and most of my classmates' social links aren't available. During some fusion prep, I got a lucky skill mutation. Palinpa changed to Revolution, which might be helpful later. I then fused that into the persona I really wanted, Naga. His elect resistance will come in real handy for Fanatic Tower. It uses insane electric attacks. While Oberon can null them, the tower is also able to use Elect Break, which is especially dangerous if it's going for a Mind Charge spell. Break spells aren't able to cancel resistances though, only null, repel, and drain. This is exclusive to all versions of Persona 3 except Reload. As for the fight itself, it's hell. It's fucking terrible, dude. It took me 25 minutes. For reference, that's longer than the Hierophant and Lovers back to back. And that's just the successful take. The power creep is starting to become a more prevalent obstacle now. Fanatic Tower only takes decent damage from strike and wind attacks, the former of which can be dodged more frequently with a dodge passive skill. It's completely immune to ice, so Mitsuru is relegated to solely healing. As if the damage this thing can deal isn't enough to contend with, It can also use poison mist. Status ailments tend to mess up the healing priority of your party members. They usually prioritize anyone who has an ailment, and will only use status healing items if they're topped off essentially. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure party members in this game use their own limited items, rather than the ones from your inventory. So it's not even like you can really rely on that more than once or twice a battle. Whenever the tower elect breaks me, I switch over to Naga. After a certain point, I don't bother reviving Yukari and Mitsuru anymore. I have the protagonist and Akihiko handle the second half of the boss with our fists. Then I revive my party members at the last second, so they can get a split of the experience. And that's the story of how I took down a tower with my bare hands. For the first time this entire playthrough, I managed to reach the roadblock before the full moon. And just in time too. I come into Justice and Chariot with Ares, thinking that I'm being clever, but then realize I got Zane and Getsue mixed up. Zane gains power the closer you are to a new moon, and Getsue gains power the closer you are to a full moon. Oops. I should also note that even though Aigis has joined the party and she's fairly strong at the moment, I want all the experience to go to my final party. Yukari may be getting KO'd a lot right now, but she's an essential part of the puzzle I've set up. Only notable things I really have to say about this fight are, Mitsuru is still the only one dealing decent damage, and I got a pretty clutch counter proc when Justice tried to use myriad arrows. Either that or I set up an attack mirror beforehand and just forgot. I finished them off with a Mazio gem for the simultaneous kill. They can revive each other at half health, and I'm not bothering with that. Everyone in my party gains about 3 levels, and Fuka is now able to tell me what buffs and debuffs are in effect. This will definitely be very handy, as I have to be more cognizant of that for this challenge. I shortly after max out my Hermit social link and... oh shit, I just realized, I'm level 22 now. That means I can now fuse Legion. What's so great about Legion? Nothing! At least not in of itself. What's great is Legion's effect in weapon fusion. The weapons will have 1 attack power, but they increase my max HP by 100. This, compounded with vitality rings, will send my HP through the roof. Once again, the extra bulk could come in handy if I need to play more defensively. I also fuse Mitra for the next boss. I return to Tartarus to take on Magical Magus next. Koromaru has joined the party at this point, but his damage output is so pitiful even with Fire Boost or Fire Amp, I don't think he has a place in my party. What I can use him for is stockpiling items. Koromaru will be available for walks at night sometimes. If you save before walking him and make sure to never walk him with one of your party members, you can farm Balms of Life, amongst other items. Since Mitra blocks ice and I passed on Miragi to it, my protagonist is completely safe from the boss, in the case they get the chance to attack me. Ideally, they stay stun locked most of the time, but they do manage to break out on occasion from my spells missing. They're immune to ice themselves, so I have Akihiko and Yukari picking them off. These group keeper fights are a war of attrition, but each time you eliminate one, you have less of them hurling attacks at you, and you can take out the others more quickly. I win without too much trouble. I'm not ready for Natural Dancer yet, so let's move on to Hermit. At this point, Ken and Shinjiro have joined the team, and they honestly join at high enough levels to have a relatively normal experience with the upcoming full moon boss. But I'm not wasting my experience points on them. The option is tempting, but I gotta keep thinking in the long run. Now, I want to emphasize that the Hermit is not a hard fight per se. He's just a really long one. Like, 38 minutes. The most threatening thing Hermit can do is use electric attacks, so if things ever go south for Mitsuru and Yukari, the protagonist and Akihiko will always survive, as long as you're not too reckless. As for the boss's signature move, Giga Spark, it takes quite a few turns to charge up and can be disrupted with a critical hit. Revolution strat works about half the time here, which is good enough for me. When Giga Spark does go through, it never misses. It'll pretty much kill anyone except MC and Akihiko regardless of buffs or debuffs, but it's not too tough to recover from. After a long and arduous cycle of buffing, debuffing, casting Revolution to hit or miss results, and reviving Mitsuru because she's still my best damage dealer in this fight, We finally beat the boss. My protagonist grows from level 22 to 25. Before taking on Natural Dancer again, I work on social links for a while. To quickly summarize, I've maxed out Magician, Hierophant, Hermit, and most recently, Devil Tower and Lovers. Only Magician and Lovers were really high priority, the rest of them were the result of free time during summer break and at night after maxing my social stats. Nonetheless, it's time to return to Tartarus. During a fusion spree, I get a skill mutation. Agilao becomes Regenerate 1. Remember this for later viewers. I fuse an Empusa for this fight with Bewilder and Revolution. My entire party is set to knockdown, so they won't break the stun lock by attacking the boss while it's already down. I have wind resistance on top of wind evasion footwear, and my charm resistant weapons. Even with my wind resistance, Garudine can still deal a pretty large amount to my health. It still one-shots Akihiko and Mitsuru, but with enough ailments, crits, and bad moves on the boss's part, I manage to win before a charmed Yukari has the chance to do any harm. I survive by the skin of my teeth. My protagonist grows to level 26 and Yukari to 25. We're finally making it to block 3. My main personas for this first boss are Shisa to exploit the next boss's soft weakness to ice, and Pale Rider to inflict rage on them, and deal wind damage too, since that actually does more. The strat is to knock down every arcane turret with ice, then follow up with wind if we can knock them all down again, or hit them after they've already used their turn getting back up. You technically don't have to enrage them to make the fight doable, however it does make the turrets take way more damage and speeds up the process significantly. It's taking more thought and strategy to cheese these bosses, and honestly I'm all for it. I miss when it took more intricate knowledge of a game to break it apart. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, I finally got fire resistance armor for Mitsuru. I'm gonna need that pretty soon. The boss goes down pretty easily with the strat I laid out here, so there's not much to really talk about. Oh boy, now I'm really stuck between a rock and a hard place. My two choices are either proceed through Tartarus and fight Sleeping Table, or wait until the full moon to fight Strength and Fortune. I'm still level 26 by the way. Normally a full moon operation wouldn't be so scary, but keep in mind the only reason I survived the last one was because I had 2 party members that could wall most of the boss's attacks. I went through over half the game just using the tools at my disposal, but that's obviously not going to be enough anymore. If I knew it would come to this, I would have started a lot earlier, but it's time to go fishing. For skill mutations. If you've played SMT Nocturne before, you probably know the general gist of this mechanic, but I'll get into the specifics of how it works in Persona 3. Personas have a small chance of one of their skills morphing into another skill. In Nocturne, they never tell you which skill is about to change, but in Persona 3, they will always tell you. Generally, if it's a skill you care about, it's not worth the risk of losing an essential skill for your build. However, if it's a skill you don't care about or want to morph, you might as well go for it and see what you get. But wait, if my personas need to level up to get a random skill mutation, wouldn't I have to grind normal encounters for experience? You can, but you don't have to. This is where those rank 10 social links start to pay off. Yes, you can fish for skill mutations right out of the gate if your persona levels up from Arcana bonuses. Obviously, the best personas to do this with are the ones with the biggest XP bonus from social links. Skills in Persona 3 have a hidden hierarchy, so using this neat little game facts guide, I know what skills to start with to acquire the ones I need. I'll also know what skills can and can't be morphed to avoid any dead ends. And unlike Nocturne, skills can only ever morph up a tier, it'll never go down. And wouldn't you have it, that Regenerate 1 skill I got earlier was the perfect starting point. The next tier up just happens to be where skill mutations start to get really good. If you were to do this on real hardware, you would have to save your game before fusing, and reload if you didn't get a skill mutation you wanted. Or didn't get one at all. I just threw down a save state before fusing a persona. If I get a good skill I could use later, I chain fuse and pass that skill onto another persona, and save it to the compendium for later use. Then repurchase the old personas and keep fusing again. From this one regenerate skill, I managed to net myself Mind Charge, Null Ice, Marakukaja, Mediarama,
and there comes a giant fish!
a party-wide defense buff, and a stronger healing spell might just be what I need. I proceed to the next boss, and it's still not enough. In fact, it sweeps my party with Heat Wave on both my attempts. Even if I do manage to survive, Mediarama isn't enough to recover the massive HP pool I needed to even survive in the first place. It seems I'm gonna need more than just a few skills to get by. I reload to a previous save and keep fishing. And to those of you wondering, yes, this is about as engaging as fishing in real life. Since I have Null Ice, I can start fishing for even higher tier skills through it. I get Repel Wind, which I then use to get even higher tier skills. Through it, I got Absorb Fire, Tetrakarn, Akasha Arts, Repel Strike, Makarakarn, and Medea Rahan. These skills will be very helpful against both Strength and Sleeping Table. Tetrakarn will pretty much ensure protection against all of Strength's attacks, especially Heat Wave. Medea Rahan is the best healing skill I can get through skill mutation. The highest tier of skills are unobtainable. Repel Strike will ensure that the protagonist is safe even if his barrier is dispersed. I think we're as ready as we can possibly be now. My first couple attempts didn't go well. In fact, my entire party got charmed. By the boss, not the roulette. On my first attempt, my protagonist used Medea Rahan on the boss. On my second attempt, I got unlucky with a 2-hit Tempest Slash. The third attempt, however, I was fully prepared. I got my charm-resistant weapons to protect me. Things go pretty smoothly. The roulette gimmick isn't much to worry about. Once you get the timing right, you can basically control where it lands. It'll always stop across from where you pressed. Sometimes, if you're not quick enough, it might slip into red and screw you over. I usually press as soon as the needle even touches blue. I favor Panic for status ailments, since it'll prevent Strength from using its skills. I also favor buffs over debuffs on the roulette, since Akihiko can already debuff for me. And I always shoot for the highest possible damage on the healing and damage roulette. It's dealing way more damage than I can deal myself. If 2 or more of my party members lose their Tetrakarn, I recast it even if someone still has it. This will cost quite a lot of SP, but thankfully, I've saved enough SP restoring items for an occasion like this. Something worth noting here is that even if you crit the boss, it can't be knocked down. Even if it did, I don't know if it would even prompt an all-out attack since Fortune is still kind of on the field. After about 18 minutes, Strength finally goes down by repel damage, leaving Fortune wide open. Fortune isn't nearly as threatening. It can only use its turn on either the roulette or an attack, not both. While it does try to cheat you with the roulette now, it still works the same as the normal one. Just press confirm directly across from the blue panel. It does get an error rain in, but everyone except Akihiko still has their Tetrakarn, so it does huge damage back. Unlike Strength, Fortune can be knocked down. So I managed to get an all-out attack in, though it only deals a little bit of extra damage. Before long, I beat Fortune and gain a massive amount of XP. My entire party is now level 29, save for Mitsuru reaching 30. What a great and productive night. But will this be enough to defeat the Sleeping Table? Let's find out. From this point forward, our characters will gradually start to have their second awakenings. This doesn't really change anything strategically, it just upgrades everyone's resistances to null, and unlocks the rest of their level up skills. This is where we're going to make good use of those other skill mutations we fished for. Absorb Fire, Makarakarn, Windamp, and Garudine. Through a long and complicated chain of downfusing, I managed to spread at least 3 of the 4 among each of the Justice Personas I have available. I'll need the light immunity for the table's Hamaon. Even after all that work, I only managed to roll 3 of the 4 skills I want. It'll have to do. I fuse a Sati for healing, Marakukaja, and Rakunda to make up for it. Finally, I fuse a Queen Mabe with Garudine, Windamp, and Makarakarn. I'll definitely need the reflect damage to cut through the boss's health fast. The longer the fight drags on, the further I push my luck. This took many attempts. After a while, I stopped keeping track of how many attempts it took. I completely disregard damage boosting accessories in favor of stacking both vitality rings and plus 100 HP weapons. My party can just barely survive a Megidola by the skin of their teeth with Mirakukaja, and Yukari just straight up can't survive without Tarunda too. Miragidyne is pretty much the same story. My wind-amped Garudyne deals pretty good damage, but my party members can't keep up. It looks like just nulling or draining fire on my protagonist isn't enough. I'll have to actively rely on Makarakarn. Most of its attacks can be reflected except Megidola, but it's also kind of random when it decides to use it. On top of that, I'm basically reloading until I get a turn order where Akihiko can cast Tarunda before the boss's turn, so I can start the battle off with both defense up and attack down on the boss. Yukari's Patra comes in handy here, as the boss is able to inflict fear and follow up with Ghastly Wail to insta-kill scared party members. Even though Sleeping Table resists fire, the reflect damage from Miragidyne is still more than what my party can deal on average. Even though I spent a long time on this boss, a successful attempt is only about 7 minutes long. Hamaun may be an instant death attack, but at least it only targets one party member. Seeing one of those is the best case scenario, especially if it misses. You should definitely have enough homunculi for the entire game through chest farming for other items alone. Evil Touch or Hamaun missing is an opportunity to bounce back, so I have to take advantage of it. I did farm for some magic mirrors as well, so I wouldn't have to spend the SP on Makarakarn every time. There's a chance it might use Evil Touch or Hamaun to get rid of one of your character's barriers, but any amount of reflect damage is still worth it. The moment Megidola comes out is where things start to get messy. A turn of you healing is a turn not spent on using a magic mirror or recasting Mirakukaja. With bad timing, your defense buff or attack debuff could wear off just as Megidola comes out. Somewhere towards the end, I make a ballsy move and use a mirror over healing. I predict it right not just once, not twice, but thrice. I win, but I'm not able to revive Yukari for the experience. I'm really debating over whether I want to do it again, but with everyone alive at the end. I make a separate save and try again for about half an hour. Getting a win is hard enough, but getting everyone to survive is even harder. I even tried switching out Yukari with Ken for his light resistance. In the end, I just cut my losses and have Yukari lose out on the XP. It's not a big deal. The next couple of bosses aren't anything to write home about, so I'll keep it brief. Hell Knights are vulnerable to Charm. Without Dreamfest to guarantee it, I have to resort to Charm-boosted King Frost. Once I do manage to get them all charmed, I cast Revolution so that they'll crit each other. It's quite amusing. The Knights end up doing most of the work themselves since they resist magic and I'm running a magic-focused party for the most part. Even my own physical skills aren't doing anything crazy to them. Mythical Gigas is even less remarkable. Tetrakarn is your best friend, especially if the boss uses Power Charge followed by Deathbound. They can cast Miragidyne, but that's pretty uncommon. It certainly caught me off guard when I saw it. And so, for the second time in this run, I'm able to reach the end of the block before the full moon. I forgot to keep track of this, but I grew to level 31 after all that. After maxing out Moon, Emperor, and Chariot, I fish for one last skill mutation. Repel Wind morphs into Divine Grace, which doubles the recovery amount of healing spells. I pass that on to a new Sati, along with Medea Rama and Repel Strike. Medea Rahan costs too much SP for me at the moment, and Hanged Man is going to be a long fight for sure. Once again, we're gonna need Repel Strike and Tetrakarn, but before we do that, we're gonna need to fight Strega. The most threatening thing about Jin is that he can cast Tarukaja on Takaya to power up his Mind Charge Megiddo, which did kill me once. Mudo is a thing, but after Sleeping Table, I'm not scared of any single target instant death spells anymore. Other than that, Makarakarn will mostly reflect Takaya spells back at him. I remember to farm for mirrors beforehand, so I start the battle off with 12. Once Jin is alone, the only thing he can really do to hurt you is fire attacks. That Akasha art skill I got earlier, I put it to good use here. Physical skills aren't normally as good as magic, but if it's one of the strongest physical skills versus medium tier magic, it's pretty good. I jump from level 31 to 34. Hanged Man will exclusively use strike attacks. You know, when it's not summoning its statues and minions. My first attempt was almost an hour and a half long because of how much time I had to spend getting rid of the statues over and over and over again. Then towards the end, I got careless and left my ice weakness open, and I died. I was afraid every attempt was going to be like that one, but the very next attempt I got way luckier. The statues each use a different element and also block said element. The minions can also self-destruct if you don't kill them fast enough. But they're honestly not all too threatening. If anything, these are all just nuisances to stop you from actually being able to hurt the boss. The minions eat up your barriers, so you don't have as many for those party-wide physical attacks. This fight is a matter of patience and having enough attack mirrors. Every turn I'm praying it doesn't summon the statues, and every time it doesn't, I'm pogging. Whenever the boss uses Akasha Arts, it's the most cathartic feeling ever. I get over half its health down before the boss suddenly starts summoning the statues more aggressively for the second half. In the end, I managed to win with a fully reflected Akasha Arts. I jumped from level 34 to 37. Block 5 boss fights are really something. These first couple are literally just a matter of blocking all their attacks and letting the protagonist solo them until the end where everyone gets revived. They're literally just too powerful to beat them any other way. I get a skill mutation for Bufudine, which later mutates into Null Slash. This will protect me from all of Judgment Sword's attacks. I also fuse a new Queen Mabe with Null Slash, Garudine, and Windamp. Since my persona innately nulls Elec, I'm basically impervious to the boss now. Garudine is also one of the two elements that the boss takes good damage from, the other being ice. My party members drop pretty quickly, but I literally can't lose at this point. When I'm down to the last sword, I inflict panic so that it can't kill any of my party members as I revive them. Stasis Giant is more the same story, but even more heavy on the immunities. I fuse a Hanuman with Null Slash and Repel Strike. While the giants can technically use Double Fangs for pierce damage, it's a really weak skill. I don't have to worry about that. My main method of damage is actually poison. While they resist strike, I can still poison them using my weapon that just so happens to have a poison effect on it. You can also damage them with Elec and Ice, but this is honestly just easier. They can cure each other with Posumudi, but they won't always do it. Once they're all poisoned, I just turn on turbo and hit the rush command until I'm down to the last one. Getting my party members back up comes down to how often the boss decides to attack me, which does nothing instead of my party members. I also have to make sure they're set to standby so they don't try to finish off the boss before everyone's back up. The AI will try to finish off the enemy even when set to heal support if the enemy is literally at 1 HP. The Phantom King is another boss susceptible to panic. Panic is also a status ailment that increases critical hit susceptibility. Oh boy! If it recovers and you're not able to inflict panic again before a Mind Charge Megiddo, you're dead. I was able to win on my second attempt to reach level 38, probably the easiest boss of this block. The Royal Dancers is another instance of just blocking everything they throw at me, except I'm gonna take it a step further. So a little while back I got Repel Strike to mutate into Absorb Pierce. I fuse a Lean Seed with Midir Rahan, Repel Strike, and Absorb Pierce. I also try to be cheeky and put Rakarmtra there too for something. I'll need to farm both attack and magic mirrors for this fight. I also have a persona with Tetra and Makarakarn too, just in case. The dancers can inflict all sorts of ailments, but are also susceptible to them. This is where those magic mirrors come in. While they can heal each other from status ailments, it's better than them using their turns attacking or inflicting more ailments. They can also use Primal Force and Heat Wave. That's what the attack mirrors are for. My protag is basically untouchable, but everyone else needs the help more. They managed to knock out the rest of my party, so I decided to pull out the old Rakarmtra. Except that's not how that skill works in this game. I thought Rakarmtra worked the way it did in Digital Devil Saga, where it would revive my party members. Turns out it only heals them to full, if they're alive. Not nearly as useful aside from SP cost being really cheap. Nonetheless, I still managed to get everyone back on their feet. Then I decide fuck it, I'm not letting this skill go to waste and use Rakarmtra to heal. I drop down to 1 HP, but that doesn't matter because I'm basically untouchable. Everyone gets poisoned, but that prevents them from getting hit with any other ailments, so I roll with it. The dancers finish themselves off with a repelled heat wave. Afterwards, I decide to fish for some more skill mutations. Specifically, I aim for the best physical skills I can get, since the next boss is immune to all magic. None of these end up being useful, but I'll tell you what I got anyway. I get Brave Blade, Primal Force, God's Hand, Absorb Strike, and Vorpal Blade. I was especially excited for Vorpal Blade since it gets a huge bonus for being in great condition. I spent a good while re-rolling the skill inherence lottery and finally got a Hanuman with Null Slash, Repel Strike, Absorb Pierce, and Vorpal Blade. I thought this build was perfect. I was ready to kick ass. But then this happened. So apparently you can't actually get Vorpal Blade through skill mutation. What I actually got was a dummy skill with the same name. I decide to put the rest of Tartarus on hold and just fight Chidori. She's not a particularly hard or threatening fight. The issue is her regenerate skill, Spring of Life. Without amp bracers, I'm hardly able to deal more damage than she can recover every turn. The fight would basically take an eternity to complete. With element amps on my entire party though, it's much more manageable. The only extra precaution I took was equipping charm-resistant weapons for her charm spells. My party grows to level 40, save for Yukari at 39. This is the last boss outside of Tartarus, so if I get walled by any of the later keepers, I won't have any more mandatory XP to fall back on. Level 40 allows me to fuse Ku-Kulin, the best strength-leaning persona I'll have access to at this level. I also take the time to progress my social links. I honestly don't have that many links I care about maxing. I've honestly gotten most of the skills I need through skill mutation already, so most arcanas don't really have an urgent priority. The only one I'd really like to max out at this point is Fortune. After choosing to spend Christmas with Keisuke instead of my girlfriend, I finally max out the Fortune social link and fuse a new Fortuna with Growth 3 and its heart item waiting to be produced. Now it's time to finally talk about Reckoning Dice. This thing nearly ended my no grinding streak. The first strategy I tried, well, that didn't work out. Then I tried allowing myself to get enraged by the boss with Raging Tiger. Rage is very risky because while it does increase your normal attack power and allows you to attack twice per turn, your defenses are lowered immensely, and you're locked into only attacking until it wears off. Another thing to stack things in my favor is the weapon system. So, not only do weapons come with different power, accuracy, and elements, they can also be more powerful against certain arcanas. Each weapon type has a chance of being strong against one of two arcanas associated with it. For example, one-handed swords can be strong against either Empress or Emperor. The damage boost against the arcana also becomes more potent the more powerful the weapons get. It just so happens that heavy weapons can be strong against either Fortune or Hanged Man, Reckoning Dice being of the Fortune arcana. I farm for a weapon with Deadly versus Fortune, and also get Heavy Master through skill mutation. Farming for the weapon honestly took longer than fishing for the skill mutation. Shit's weird, dude, I don't know. All these things sound great, but I also had to contend with the boss not using Provoke on me. In which case, it was either using Tetrakarn, Megidola, or Megidolon. Constantly dispelling its barrier and needing to keep up with Megidola's damage was all but too much. I even tried switching to Revolution crit lock strats, but I couldn't get it to work. Once the level gap between you and the enemy is big enough, crits become very, very, very seldom. I've noticed this in SMT5 Vengeance as well, so that strategy is no longer viable for this playthrough. I even got really close on one attempt, but I choke because I didn't hit rush fast enough before my party members would disrage me. And I have to keep everyone on heal support in the event a Megidola comes out, but I can't afford to have them disrage me and disrupt my strategy. I was stuck. Buffs and debuffs could only take me so far surviving Megidola, and it just seemed too random when I would ever get another good attempt. I was convinced that I had no other option but to grind. So I did. I only gained about 4 levels. This was enough for Yukari to learn Mediarama. I give it another whirl. It was honestly a lot better than most attempts. Yukari's Mediarama made it much easier to manage Megidola. Megidolon not so much. The very next attempt was basically a perfect win. Pretty much everything I needed to happen happened. The boss sets up Tetrakarn and provokes my protag right after power charging. I immediately hit rush so that my party will dispel its Tetrakarn. I get an insane semi-crit followed by an actual crit, then finish it with an all-out attack. That was too perfect. No healing needed whatsoever, let alone the need for Mediarama. It made me question whether I really needed to grind in the first place. Was it really that luck-based, or was I just missing something? I reloaded my save file and found out this fight was a lot more under my control than I thought. Two key factors about this boss's AI you should know. The boss is more likely to cast Provoke when Tetrakarn is active, and it will always use Tetrakarn when someone is enraged. With this knowledge in mind, I know to do two things. Do not dispel Tetrakarn until the protagonist is enraged, and just keep the entire party on rush if he does get enraged. The latter will prevent my party from using Disrage, but I can leave them be if anyone else gets enraged. Then just wait for the boss to provoke the right character. There's still a chance your provoked character can hit the Tetrakarn barrier before you can stop them, depending on the turn order. Thankfully, this doesn't screw me over. Akihiko recovers quickly, and the boss enrages the protagonist after some stalling. Right as I'm attack buffed and power charged too. I immediately hit rush and keep it active for the rest of the fight, while my party dispels the barrier with their one attack power weapons. I follow up with 2 devastating blows, and I win. I was able to salvage my streak of staying at the lowest level possible. The fight brought me up to level 41. We've reached the end of Block 5, which means all that's left is the final stretch of the game. Something that I deliberately chose not to mention until now is that sometime during the late portion of this run, I learned something very strange about this game. The Inari Shrine has a wide range of different effects it can grant you. These can range from improving a character's condition, to increasing XP and money loadouts. Most important one for me though is item conversion. Persona games are known for having a lot of useless junk items, but the Inari Shrine allows you to convert certain items into more useful ones. The one I'm most concerned with is Rancid Gravy. Yes, that random chest item in Tartarus that you'd normally groan whenever you see. You can convert 5 of those into a Soma. So, guess who hoarded all their Rancid Gravies? You'll have to save and reset until you actually get the occurrence you want at the shrine, but I'd say it's well worth it. Using the shrine does use up your day activity. Now that I've maxed out all the social links I really care about, I can spend the rest of my time offering my expired food to the RNG gods. This is only a feature in the original and Persona 3 FES. Portable and Reload would rework the shrine for duplicating skill cards only. I'll eventually convert them all, but for now, let's get started on Block 6. Noble Seekers are powerful spellcasters. Their magic is so powerful that I'm still taking pretty threatening damage even when resisting their attacks. So I fuse a brand new Kukulin with Absorb Fire, Null Ice, Repel Elec, and Repel Wind. Despite resisting their own magic, they take just about as much damage from my repels as my regular attacks with Heavy Master. It's another case of blocking everything the boss does and reviving everyone at the last second. The Carnal Snakes are a meme. If you've ever seen a speedrun of this game, you probably know about this exploit. The snakes will always 100% use Fire Break on anyone with an immunity to fire. I fused a persona with Absorb Fire and Dekunda. In Persona 3 only, Dekunda not only cancels Kunda spells, but also break skills. I'm also bringing in Junpei and Koromaru to this fight. That will use up all 3 of the snake's turns on fire breaking, and I can cancel it with Dekunda and trap them in a loop. I could try to waste my time doing this fight with my main party, but this is more fun to talk about and also more entertaining for you guys, trust me. Plus the XP they're missing out on isn't a lot. I do, however, keep Yukari and have her equipped with a Deadly vs. Lover's Bow. She and everyone else will be chipping away at the snakes while I keep them distracted with Dekunda. I do have to leave myself vulnerable for a turn to restore my SP a couple times, and I do have a close call. In retrospect, having Invigorate passives would have made this more optimal, but this gets progressively easier as each snake is defeated. Yeah, I just defeated an endgame boss with a level 11 Junpei. And he grew to level 13 from this. My Fortuna also finally finishes cooking up its heart item thanks to growth 3. This may come in handy later. Unfortunately, this next boss is not nearly as easy. In fact, for some of you, this might just be where the run ends. It sucks too, because I know for a fact that I could have beaten the next 2 bosses after this at my current level. World balance is just not practical at level 41. This thing is basically a mini Reaper. It does nothing but cast powerful party-wide damaging spells and instant death. It does technically have Spirit Drain, but I've never seen it use it before. Magic mirrors are not an option, unfortunately. This boss will cast Megidolon every turn if a magic barrier is up. The biggest deal breaker for this boss is the way buffs and debuffs work. You cannot recast them until they've worn off. That means no matter what, there will always be 1 out of every 3 turns where you don't have the safety of both your defense buff and attack buff active at the same time. And at my current level, even with the highest HP possible using equipment, I cannot survive a Megidolon if it comes out at the wrong time. What's worse is that the boss uses Megidolon more frequently as you get further into the fight. The farthest I could ever get was down to half of its HP. Now you might be wondering, is it possible to crit lock the boss like you've done with others? Here's the problem with that. If it didn't work for Reckoning Dice, a boss that I spent way more time on than this one, it's not gonna work here unless I save state every turn for the crit. That's basically tool-assisted super play at this point, which isn't really the point of this video. Someone was able to crit this boss to death in a low-level run of the portable version. You wanna know what they did? They used Vorpal Blade. Gee, you know, imagine having something like that. That'd be pretty nice. No, other physical skills won't work nearly as well. World balance resists all physical, and any other physical attacks will deal puny damage. Yes, the great bonus from Vorpal Blade is just that powerful. I sure wish I could have it! Could I have lifted the arcade ban and maxed out my strength? Maybe. I'm not sure how much that would have helped. The way Persona 3 calculates damage, the biggest factor seems to be the level difference between you and the enemy. The difference in damage would be pretty insignificant. This wouldn't normally be an issue in a normal playthrough. The game does a pretty good job preventing you from becoming too underleveled with XP scaling in normal encounters. With no way to cheese the fight or block all the enemy's attacks, I'm trapped in a corner. So no, I wasn't able to beat Persona 3 FES at the lowest possible level. But can I still beat it at a low-ish level? Alright, look, I know the term low-level run can be kind of arbitrary, especially when you make exceptions for grinding like this one. I think the term lowest level would be more accurate for a true mandatory XP only type of run. Unfortunately, I knew that at some point this wouldn't be a possibility for this run. If I didn't have to grind here, I would have definitely had to grind for Nyx. Plus the fact that I even made it to the final month of the game without grinding is already pretty insane to me. If you consider this challenge failed at this point, feel free to click off the video. For those of you still curious, let's proceed. If the boss won't ever stop attacking and I can't block any of its attacks, there's only one thing to do. Prevent it from attacking. Wait, didn't you say stun locking was off the table? Yes. At the minimal level, it is. But there is a way to guarantee critical hits, I just need to reach a higher level. You might see where I'm going with this. I grind up to level 53 in order to fuse Thor. Alongside Takemikazuchi, I can cast the fusion spell Thunder Call. It's like a weaker Thunder Rain that hits all enemies instead of just one. I'll need to make sure I have Elect Boost and Injure Bracers equipped. And also make sure I have a good turn order to get at least a couple all-out attacks per round. Starting the battle with Automatar Kajo will help too. I need to be able to deal enough damage to kill the boss before I run out of SP. Fusion spells cost 1% of your SP instead of a flat cost, so increasing my max SP won't do anything. Invigorate skills probably would have been a good idea, but I didn't really have any. I occasionally switch Akihiko to support for debuffs. In due time, I'm able to beat it. I reached level 54 from that. Next fight is honestly a breather. Fierce Cyclops uses primarily physical attacks. Thor inherently blocks strike, so I just need to pass on null strike and absorb pierce onto him. I got Bowmaster from a skill mutation for good measure. Pierce, ice, and wind are the only elements that really work on this boss, but since I'm soloing this boss and they basically can't touch me, I might as well just use the cost-free measure for the long run. These guys can also self-destruct with Last Resort, but there are two reasons why that's not an issue. Firstly, it only deals half of everyone's current HP, so it can't kill me. Secondly, if you single out each Cyclops one by one and never spread out your damage, they'll opt to cast Mazionga instead. I also block that, so this fight is free. I revive everyone at the last second, of course. Finally, we reach the Jotun of Grief. This boss absorbs everything except Pierce. The strategy here is more or less the same as Reckoning Dice, but it requires a bit more luck. There's no set behavior for when it decides to cast Provoke. Sometimes it'll just cast Megidolon and kill you, but it's doable. I thought I was screwed near the end for a second, but I somehow made it with everyone alive in the end. And that's it for Tartarus until the final day. Now that the final Tartarus Keeper is defeated, the ban on arcade grinding is lifted. I decide to raise the strength and agility of my Cuchulainn and the magic and agility for my Thor. Although this actually doesn't end up amounting to much in the end. You'll see why. I also convert the remainder of my Rancid Gravy into Somas, on top of the ones I got over the course of the game naturally. That brings my grand total to 29 Somas. I even managed to max out Empress in the meantime. And with that, it's time to fight Strega once again. I'm dealing way too little damage to Jin to fight him the normal way. It's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. He has access to every element, and I mean all of them. If you leave any weaknesses open, not only does that character take a ton of damage, but they're also essentially stun locked for the rest of the fight. Not so nice when it happens to me now, is it? If I cover everyone's weaknesses, Jin will inflict ailments instead, among those being Rage, which is not nearly as exploitable as you'd think, because he will always follow up with Megiddo. With our defenses greatly lowered from Rage, that spells immediate doom. There's a way to exploit his AI though, but I have to do the fight solo. Breaking one of the rules sort of, but I promise this will be more entertaining for you. Every time Jin gets a 1 more, he will always follow up with his basic attack, which is Fire Elemental. So if you have a persona that drains fire, you can recover most of the damage you took from the last hit. I already have Absorb Fire as a passive, so I didn't technically need to fuse Cert, but I'm at a high enough level, so I might as well. I make sure to leave my Ice weakness open. Halfway through the fight, Jin will switch over to Bufudyne, so I'll have to start using Rakukaja to survive his attacks now. Jin's fire attacks aren't quite enough to restore me to full HP, so I'll occasionally have to use a medical powder to make up for the loss over time. He oddly enough goes back to Mabufula in his last phase, so the fight ends pretty easily. This brings me to level 55. Takaya is actually easier than Jin in this run. Most of your damage dealt can be done with magic barriers. The only thing to look out for is Megidola. He only charges his normal elemental magic though, so it's not that big of a worry. Heavy Master and a hammer that's deadly versus Fortune also helps. No sweat. My final level before reaching the final boss is 56, with the rest of my party at 54. Alright, time to be 100% honest with you. I was not able to beat Nick's avatar at these levels. Everyone was dealing pitiful damage, I couldn't even get past the Magician phase. 2 reasons. 2 turns, Almighty Attack. The damage scaling is not being friendly at my levels. If Nick's avatar decides to cast 2 Miragidynes, 2 Almighty Attacks, or 1 of each, I'm dead. Hell, I'm pretty sure it only takes 1 Almighty Attack to kill me if my buffs or debuffs wear off. Sure, there's a chance it could cast really weak spells too, but I personally find that Nyx will get more aggressive once you get down to half its HP, in just this phase alone. Either that or drawing out the fight too long will make the chances of that happening bound to happen. While I was sitting at a Discord call with my friend struggling to come up with a plan to make this all work, I said to myself, hey, maybe I could deal the majority of my damage using Makara Karn. Then as I said that, a friend of mine told me about a glitch I had never heard of before. It was a glitch that could get rid of Nyx's second turn by repelling enough damage back at it to push the fight into the next phase. What? I didn't believe it, but they insisted that they've done it before. Apparently he found out about it on a Reddit post. You know, as much as I really hate r/Persona, I might as well give it a shot. If it doesn't work, I would at the very least be dealing heavy damage through repelling it. But the first thing I gotta do before any of that is make sure I'm a high enough level to survive an almighty attack. So around 60-ish. Second thing is healing. I fuse a Titania that resists all magic. This is actually better than nulling or draining it, because Nyx can use break spells to reduce your affinity to neutral. But remember, break spells don't work on regular resistance. This Titania has Medea-Rama, Divine Grace, Meipatra, and Marakukaja, my main persona for most of this fight. I also absolutely need a secondary healer. It's essential to keeping my entire party alive for this fight, and the spells I have now just aren't going to cut it. I'll need to grind Odin for his heart item, which is essentially an equipable Divine Grace, a perfect fit for Yukari with her Medea-Rama. I fuse Odin as soon as I reach level 57 so I can start leveling Odin immediately and minimize my level by the time I get his heart item. By the end of all that, I'm level 64. One of the last things I make sure to do is fuse Norn with Spellmaster that I just got from Odin. You cannot obtain Spellmaster through skill mutation. This, on top of the Invigorate 3 it learns naturally, will make Norn the best secondary persona for my protag, to deal occasional damage. The other last thing is fusing Raphael with Amrita. Raphael's innate null charm, along with the Ring of Serenity I got from Fortuna earlier, will protect me from 2 of the status ailments Nyx can inflict on me with Night Queen. I didn't plan all of this before fighting Nyx. A lot of this I came up with through experimenting, as well as attempts that failed very far into the final phase. But with all that said and done, it's time to tell you how my successful attempt went. Before I can even start repelling damage back at Nyx, I need to cast a break spell to pierce that absorption. Pulling this off on Magician is a bit tricky, since you have to cast Fire Break and Makara Karn one after another. This leaves room for Nyx to get a few good shots in, and Nyx's double turns essentially cut the duration in half. Balancing this with getting your bearings together kinda makes it not worth it. Instead, it's better to just push through until the Priestess phase. My party members are level 62, which means Mitsuru now has Ice Break. I can set her to heal support so that she'll cast it, and I can use Makara Karn or a Magic Mirror on the same turn. This ensures that any ice attacks will be bounced by next turn. Now, in order to make the turn glitch work, I have to push Nyx into the next phase from non-critical health to 0. In other words, if you see the tired or worn out pose, it won't work. Again, this is a lot more manageable on Priestess. My jaw dropped when I realized that this glitch actually worked. And for some reason this glitch is always active in reload, I wonder why. This glitch makes the entire fight much more manageable. Empress, Emperor, and Lovers are basically nothing. For Hierophant, Chariot, and Strength, I use attack mirrors to protect me from power-charged physical attacks. Nyx's almighty attack is strength-based, so it can also get boosted by power charge and crit. The attack mirror isn't a guaranteed protection, but the precaution is still effective. The point where things really start to get nerve-wracking is Justice. Instant death spells in general are an annoyance. Not just because they kill your party members, but also because it will most likely put their turns after the bosses. This means you only have the protagonist's move to brace for whatever Nyx is about to throw at you. Fortune is your breather phase. While it's immune to all magic, Yukari and Mitsuru can cast their break spells so they can deal damage to the boss. I could have used Kukolin's high strength and heavy master here, but it wasn't worth dropping my HP boosting weapon for this. Its weak elemental magic isn't too much to be worried about. Hanged Man is the final phase before death. This one has Dark Instant Death and can Mind Charge Megidola. It can get a little dicey, but nothing unbearable since Nyx only has one turn now. Unsurprisingly, the thing that justifies the need for this glitch the most is the final phase, Death. It can use spells of every element except Light and Dark, and can also cast Poison Mist to be annoying. All buffs, debuffs, and break spells are on the table, as well as Power Charge and Mind Charge. Nyx will sometimes cast Dekaja or Dekunda to cancel buffs and debuffs, but this is actually a blessing in disguise. With only one turn per cycle, either of these moves are a wasted turn for Nyx. This phase, for the most part, is a long war of attrition. It's easily the length of the past few phases combined, especially when it uses Moonless Gown. Normally, it only lasts for 2 rounds, but since Nyx only gets 1 turn per round now, I have to wait 4 turns for it to wear off. 4 rounds for me to set up, sure, but also 4 rounds where I can't really attack the boss while Nyx is still able to get attacks off on me. For full transparency, I had to redo this very long fight quite a few times, each attempt being at least an hour long with speed up. On my final successful attempt, I wrote a save state at the beginning of death phase. At this point, this run's already somewhat invalid considering how much grinding I had to do for this boss alone. So, I don't care. I'm just finishing the game as a formality at this point. I only had to reload my state once, but the attempt where I won was pretty anticlimactic. I'm sure this has happened to some of you before, but for some reason, Nyx just never used Night Queen on my successful attempt. I've seen this happen on a regular playthrough too. Nyx's AI seems to have 2 different modes it can go into when its health is really low. It'll either spam Night Queen non-stop, or it'll just keep casting normal spells like Megaten. I don't know exactly what causes this. The pressure was still on in my mind though. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't kill this boss fast, it could suddenly start spamming Night Queen. On the last pixel of health, I go all in with Norn. I don't even bother healing on the last turn. I did it. I gained 24 experience, and my final level is still 64. For anyone curious, here are my final XP counts for this run. If I did my math right, my total amount of XP for the whole run is 374,976, with only 132,094 of those being mandatory, and 242,882 optional experience points. I know that sounds kind of bad, but keep in mind that XP required to level up increases exponentially with each level. So that optional XP only amounts to about 20 levels out of the 64 I needed for Nyx. So now I can officially say that this Persona 3 low level challenge was a total wash. A little while back I asked my audience what level they beat Nyx at, and most people said in their 70s or higher. The fact that I even had to get close to that 70s range is a little disappointing, but considering about half of you are over leveling for Nyx anyway, I'd say this run has at least some merit. I thought I had a pretty decent plan going into this run, and in a general sense I did make a lot of good calls ahead of time that ended up being for the better. Mostly in terms of party lineup. I could have replaced Ken with Yukari as my healer, given his better HP pool and much better weapon type. Not only that, but Kyuuyaku's fusion weapon could have made him a more versatile wind user, with access to both a wind and elect skill on top of healing. However, you can't fuse Kyuuya until level 40, which didn't happen until way late into the game for me. That dark weakness would have also been a pain to deal with, especially against Hanged Man Nyx. Other than that one small bit of doubt, I think I made the right choices for my party comp. Akihiko's debuffs and pretty good elect damage were invaluable. He was actually able to learn Zeodyne before Yukari and Mitsuru could learn Garudyne and Bufudyne respectively. Mitsuru was dealing consistently good damage with her Bufudyne instead of Bufula up until Nyx's death phase, which was definitely necessary given how much I needed my protag to primarily focus on support. In terms of what I wish I could have done better, I definitely would have started fishing for skill mutations a lot sooner. Sure, I didn't really need them until Strength and Fortune, but there were definitely fights that could have been shorter with the right skills. Looking at you, Hermit. I also maybe could have done more research on this game beforehand. I didn't know anything about getting somas at the shrine until I was at Block 5 of Tartarus, or about weapon types being stronger against certain arcanas. Nonetheless, it was still fun learning the info I did for this run. I'm always learning new things about this game, whether it be from replaying the game myself or just watching someone else play it. It's a quality that all of my favorite games have and what keeps me coming back to them. A lot of the info I learned for this run was from referencing Yuzu's 2-man party minimum XP challenge. In fact, I copied the Reckoning dice and Jin strats straight from them. Yuzu beat the game at level 70, and even said it'd be hell to manage below that level. I was able to get my levels a little lower than that, though I feel using the turn glitch may have played a big role in that. Lastly, I would have done this run on normal or easy mode instead. I know Nitsua Gamer was able to at least make it to Nyx with only mandatory battles on easy. While grinding would still be a requirement for Nyx no matter what, I feel I probably could have brought my level down a bit if it weren't for the brutal enemy damage of hard mode. I could postulate hypotheticals all I want, but for now, I'll leave this all to someone else. One of the reasons I did this run was because no one on YouTube has ever completed the challenge. I figured if there was at least one complete run out there, it could at least serve as a good blueprint or reference for anyone else who might want to try the challenge themselves but were too intimidated by the lack of completed runs for this category. I can't deny the possibility that this run could be optimized in the hands of the right person. So if you love Persona 3 and have a lot of time on your hands, I encourage you to give this challenge a shot. Oh, and would you look at that? It's still at 0. Oh, can we just stop pretending this joke is funny?